Berlin burned above, a city collapsing into rubble, smoke, and shouted orders, while beneath its streets a different scene played out. A concrete complex of corridors, low ceilings, and small rooms where the last signals of a vanished regime were issued. What happened to that underground place, the Führerbunker, after the guns fell? And why did successive authorities move to erase it from the map and from memory? The story begins not in 1945, but years earlier, when the German capital prepared for a different kind of threat. In 1936, the Reich Chancellery commissioned an air raid shelter beneath the gardens, a reinforced refuge designed for emergencies. It was practical, unspectacular at first, a Führerbunker connected to surface buildings by stairwells and service shafts. But as the war turned against Germany, the space below was transformed. By 1943-44, the shelter had been enlarged and hardened into what later historians called the Führerbunker. 2 levels cut deep into the Berlin soil, roughly 30 rooms arranged along narrow corridors, thick earthen banks and slabs of concrete overhead that in places were measured in meters rather than feet. The lower level lay about 8 meters below ground. Walls and ceilings were built to hold back artillery and aerial bombs. It was engineered to be small, private, and survivable, but not comfortable. To picture the bunker is to imagine cramped spaces lit by electric bulbs, a persistent smell of damp concrete, the vibration of distant shells, and a circulation of people who had retreated from the open city into a subterranean world. By January 1945, with Soviet armies approaching, Adolf Hitler and a shrinking retinue of officials, officers, secretaries, and household staff had moved into this shelter. Traudl Junge and other secretaries later described a life of routine and strain. Typed orders in the same dim rooms where maps were spread, briefings held in low-ceilinged chambers, and the increasingly fatalistic sense that the outside world was collapsing. In late April 1945, the bunker became the stage for the regime's final acts. Hitler's marriage to Eva Braun on April 29th, his dictation of a last political testament, and on April 30th, the ends of their lives. Joseph Goebbels and his family followed soon after. Those human facts are grim and straightforward. Inside the concrete envelope, decisions were made, farewells given, and deaths occurred. In the garden above the Chancellery, bodies were burned hastily after the suicides, according to the accounts of witnesses and later reports. The scene passed from history into a forensic and political puzzle once Soviet forces entered the city. What the Soviets found, and what they chose to reveal, shaped the early post-war fate of the bunker. When Red Army troops and Soviet security services took control of central Berlin, the Führerbunker did not become a public object of documentation in the way Allied forces handled many German military sites. Instead, Soviet military counterintelligence units, notably SMERSH, sealed and searched the complex, conducting forensic work that included the recovery of fragments and dental remains that were later reported to be consistent with Hitler's dental records. Soviet reports and later investigations into their archives suggest that fragments believed to be from Hitler were analyzed by medical and forensic teams. But political calculation quickly intervened in the public narrative. Joseph Stalin and Soviet authorities exploited uncertainty about Hitler's fate for propaganda and intelligence value. Official Soviet statements alternated between confident forensic assertions in private reports and ambiguous public messages that left room for doubt and rumor. The result for the site itself was not preservation as a historical exhibit, but controlled secrecy. Secrecy soon became action. The Soviet occupation authorities staged visible demolitions of the more exposed symbols of Nazi power. The Chancellery buildings above ground were pulled down in public operations, starting in the immediate post-war years. These demolitions were intended to signal the end of the regime. Yet repeatedly trying to destroy the subterranean complex proved more difficult. Reinforced concrete does not surrender to rhetoric. Reports from the late 1940s describe efforts to demolish parts of the underground using explosives, attempts to flood and collapse chambers, and the deliberate filling of known openings with rubble and debris from the ruined city. A notable demolition took place in December 1947 when some of the surface structures were demolished in a visible display. But historians note that even after such explosions and filling, the lower heavily reinforced chambers held out. Later surveys would suggest that only a fraction of the original structure was eliminated by these methods. Historians estimate that perhaps on the order of 15 to 20% of the bunker's shell survived beneath later layers of rubble and new construction. Those numbers are estimates, and they underline a paradox. You can raise a building above ground and claim victory, but beneath the earth, the infrastructure is stubbornly persistent. As Berlin was partitioned and the German Democratic Republic took shape to the east, the politics of memory took on a new urgency. For the GDR, the narrative of anti-fascism became a foundational myth. The new East German state defined itself against National Socialism and sought to erase its physical traces as much as its political ones. The Führerbunker presented an awkward problem, a concrete location tied directly to the personification of the regime the state claimed to have defeated. East German authorities therefore pursued policies of omission and concealment. Official maps and tourist guides prepared in the 1950s and 1960s often left out the exact location or made no note of its existence. The site was sometimes repurposed or plowed under, built over with new construction in the government quarter and housing projects. Where discoveries occurred, workers hitting concrete, groundwater-filled chambers, or unexpected stairwells, the state responded quietly. One documented instance in the 1970s involved construction crews and a small breakthrough into the bunker's remains. The Stasi and other security organs moved in, sealed off the area, and filled it with sand, rubble, and cement. In those years, the bunker was not treated as an object of archaeological interest, but as a dangerous political relic to be neutralized. Why such deliberate erasure? The motives were multiple and interconnected. First, there was obvious symbolism. To remove the physical headquarters of a genocidal regime was to annihilate a potent symbol of its power. For the GDR leadership, keeping that symbol visible risked contradicting the state's anti-fascist legitimacy. Second, there was a pragmatic concern about pilgrimage and myth-making. Officials feared that an exposed bunker could become a focus for neo-Nazi gatherings, for mythologizing a lost order. Cold War authorities in both East and West watched how places associated with violent national myths could attract admirers and exploiters. Suppressing physical reminders was one way to reduce that risk. Third, practical urban needs mattered. Post-war Berlin needed housing, infrastructure, and rebuilding. Clearing ruins and filling basements was part of reconstruction. To restore a functioning city, planners often found it expedient to bury traces of the past under a new street plan. But erasure is not a single neat act. It is a series of decisions that leave traces and contradictions. Throughout the Cold War, the site of the Führerbunker remained a palimpsest. Concrete still lay under streets, old stairways met modern foundations, and rumors circulated among residents and workers who occasionally encountered odd spaces below ground. Western journalists and historians writing in the 1950s and later tried to piece together the bunker's layout from wartime plans, testimony, and limited access to documents, but full independent verification was difficult while the Soviets and then East German authorities controlled the area. When the Berlin Wall fell and Germany reunited, the sealed, buried, and forgotten corners of the city opened, and the Führerbunker re-entered public debate. In 1990, workers and investigators located surviving sections of the complex. Journalists photographed concrete staircases and rooms that for decades had been either forgotten or actively hidden. The discovery reopened the ethical debate. Should such a site be excavated, studied, and displayed, or should it remain buried to prevent pilgrimage and sensationalism? Archaeologists and historians argued for documentation on the grounds of historical accountability. The physical remains are primary evidence of a catastrophic history and deserve study. Others cautioned that exposing the space risked turning it into a shrine for extremists or into an attraction that blurred morality with voyeurism. The post-1990 choices were cautious and deliberate. Rather than large-scale excavation or the creation of a dramatic memorial, German authorities favored restraint. The surviving underground chambers were backfilled and sealed in ways intended both to secure the site and to remove it from public access. In 2006, a small, carefully worded information panel was installed near the surface at a discrete gravel patch marking the approximate location. The plaque explains what happened there in sober terms and points visitors toward historical context without turning the spot into a place of pilgrimage. Around the same time, independent institutions took on the educative role the city would not. The Berlin Story Museum and other exhibitions created reconstructions and exhibits that explain the bunker's layout and its historical significance away from the actual footprint. These museum reconstructions use photographs, plans, and carefully controlled displays to teach visitors about the bunker's role in the regime's final days while minimizing the risk that the original site might become fetishized. That resolution, studying, explaining, but not sanctifying the physical ruins, reflects a broader conversation about memory and ethics. There is no single right answer to how societies should treat places associated with atrocity. Excavation and display can serve accountability and education, helping future generations understand how such power operates in concrete terms. They can also unintentionally glorify perpetrators by centering physical places and objects in a narrative that invites obsession. Conversely, burial and erasure can protect against fetishization but risk excusing or forgetting the past, making moral reckoning more difficult. German post-war policy toward the Führerbunker embodied that tension. The desire to destroy a symbol of evil and to prevent its misuse, but also the responsibility to remember and teach. The compromise chosen after reunification, limited public marking combined with museum interpretation, aimed to balance those imperatives. It is worth emphasizing the political quality of erasure. The bunker did not vanish because it was physically fragile alone. It survived in parts precisely because of the stubborn durability of reinforced concrete. It was erased because people in positions of power decided the costs of keeping it visible outweighed the benefits. Soviets used demolition selectively and secrecy strategically. East German authorities omitted and covered over in service of their anti-fascist narrative and security concerns. West Berliners and later unified German officials chose to keep the exact spot discreet, privileging interpretation over spectacle. Each decision was a political act about identity, legitimacy, and the control of public memory. Even now, some fragments remain in archival plans, in the accounts of witnesses, and in the museums that reconstruct the space for educational purposes. Historians continue to refine estimates of what physical fabric survived and what was destroyed. Some suggest that a significant portion of the lower chambers remains buried beneath the modern neighborhood, though exact percentages are debated and based on limited surveys. For visitors in central Berlin today, there is no dramatic pit, no tourist shrine. Instead, there is a small plaque and a stanza of urban landscape that looks ordinary. A gravel patch, a row of modern buildings, daily traffic. The bunker's physical presence has been minimized. Its moral presence persists in museums, in books, and in public debate. Answering the title directly, the bunker was not simply lost to time. It was the object of a concerted policy of erasure, undertaken for political, symbolic, and practical reasons. The occupying Soviets sealed it, forensically searched it, and then tried to demolish and bury parts of it while exploiting ambiguity for propaganda. The East German state continued the policy of concealment, omitting it from maps, filling breaches, and building over what remained. After 1989, Germany chose a different path than total obliteration or full exposure. It registered the site with limited public acknowledgement, provided educational reconstructions through museum work, and kept the actual footprint discreet. The result is an intentionally muted commemoration designed to avoid shrine-making while preserving the facts in a controlled, interpretive context. The fate of the Führerbunker raises an enduring question for any society confronting a difficult past. When a place embodies atrocity, should it be preserved and shown so that people can learn, or buried and hidden to prevent glorification? The German case shows that there is no simple technical answer. The choices are political, ethical, and pragmatic, and they change with time and context. For Berlin, the choice has been to keep the physical site quiet and to make the history of what happened there visible through careful scholarship, museum work, and sober public information. That approach acknowledges both the need to remember and the danger of turning horror into an object of fascination. If you want a deeper look at how post-war Germany handled other wartime legacies, the ships, the factories, the infrastructure, There are related explorations that trace those stories through seizure, repurposing, and disposal. And if you're interested in the documents, testimonies, and museum work that shape our understanding of the bunker today, many reliable sources and exhibitions offer detailed, measured accounts. In the end, the Führerbunker's story is a study in how a city and a nation choose to dispose of a physical symbol of evil. It was not simply erased by brute force, it was managed, sealed, filled, omitted, and finally marked in a way intended to remember without revering. That balance remains fragile, and the debate about how best to confront painful history is ongoing. If this account helped you make sense of what happened to the bunker and why Germany tried to bury it, subscribe for more history grounded in evidence and careful interpretation, and consider visiting trusted museums and archives if you want to explore the primary records for yourself.